James Wilson never imagined his walk home from debate practice would change his life forever. One moment he was planning his college applications, the next he was pressed against a wall with cold steel handcuffs digging into his wrists. All because he matched a description. But Officer Richard Dawson had no idea who he was dealing with. "My uncle always told me to stay calm in situations like this," James said quietly, his words seemingly falling on deaf ears. "Yeah, kid. My uncle works at NASA, and my cousin's the Queen of England," Officer Dawson mocked, not believing a word. As the crowd of witnesses grew, phones recording every moment of the unjust attention, none of them noticed the sleek black government SUV with tinted windows pulling silently to the curb. Officer Dawson was about to learn a harsh lesson about assumptions, power, and the consequences that come when you target the wrong person. Because James wasn't lying about his uncle, and that man emerging from the SUV was about to turn this routine stop into a reckoning that would shake an entire police department to its core. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Westfield High School's campus as James Wilson gathered his debate notes. At 17, James was the definition of potential debate team captain, AP student with a 4.2 GPA, and already fielding interest from Ivy League schools. His dark blue blazer with a school emblem hung neatly over his shoulder as he waved goodbye to his debate coach. "Great argument today, James." That rebuttal on economic policy was impressive, called Mr. Henderson as James pushed through the double doors. "Thanks, coach. See you Thursday for Nationals prep," James replied, a genuine smile crossing his face. James checked his watch, 5:47 p.m. If he hurried, he could make it home in time for dinner with his mother before she left for her night shift at the hospital. He adjusted his backpack and started his usual route home, passing through downtown Westfield. The air held that peculiar mix of spring warmth and evening coolness. James plugged in his earbuds, the soft classical piano of Chopin helping him decompress after the intensive 3-hour debate practice. His mind wandered to college applications and the scholarship essays waiting for him at home. As he approached the corner of Maple and Fifth, James noticed the patrol car crawling alongside him. He paid it little mind at first. Police were common in this part of town, especially since the convenience store robbery last week. James continued walking, mentally outlining his argument for the national debate tournament. The cruiser's lights suddenly flashed, the brief whoop of the siren causing James to remove his earbuds. "Hey, you there. Stop right where you are," came the commanding voice from the patrol car. James stopped, confused. He glanced around, unsure if the officer was addressing someone else. Officer Richard Dawson emerged from the vehicle, one hand resting on his holster. At 38, Dawson was a 12-year veteran of the Westfield Police Department with a record that was neither stellar nor problematic until recently. "Hands where I can see them," Dawson ordered, approaching James with practiced authority. James complied immediately, heart rate accelerating. "Is something wrong, officer? What are you doing in this area?" Dawson asked, eyes narrowing as he circled James. "I'm walking home from debate practice, sir." "I go to Westfield High," James replied, keeping his voice steady despite his growing confusion. Officer Dawson's gaze fell on James's backpack. "What's in the bag?" "Just my laptop, school books, and debate materials, sir. We had a robbery at the Quick Stop last week." "Suspect matches your description," Dawson stated flatly. James blinked in surprise. "Sir, I was at a debate tournament in Springfield last week. Our team took second place. You can call my coach, Mr. Henderson, or Principal Wells to verify." Dawson ignored the explanation. "ID," he demanded, hand extended. James slowly moved his hand toward his back pocket. "My wallet is in my back pocket, sir." "I'm reaching for it now." Slowly, Dawson warned, his posture tense. James carefully extracted his wallet and handed over his student ID. "I also have my school debate team ID if that helps." Officer Dawson glanced at the ID, then back at James, seemingly unpersuaded. "Turn around, hands against the wall." "Sir," James questioned, his confusion evident. "May I ask why I'm being detained?" "Just following procedure." "Now turn around and place your hands on the wall," Dawson repeated, his tone hardening. A few pedestrians slowed their pace, watching the interaction with growing interest. Across the street, an elderly woman paused with her shopping bags, her brow furrowed in concern. James complied, placing his hands against the cool brick wall of the adjacent building. His mind raced through procedures he'd learned in his civics class about rights during police interactions. Officer, I believe I have the right to know why I'm being detained. Matching a suspect description is reasonable suspicion, Dawson replied mechanically, beginning to pat James down. Where are you coming from again? Westfield High School. I had debate practice until 5:30, James repeated, maintaining composure despite the growing audience of onlookers. Sir, the school is only 6 blocks from here. There are probably security cameras that show me leaving just minutes ago. Officer Dawson removed James's backpack, placing it on the hood of his patrol car. We'll see about that. Don't move. James remained still, facing the wall as instructed, aware of the murmurs from gathering bystanders. He could hear Officer Dawson unzipping his backpack, rifling through his carefully organized notes and textbooks. What's this? Dawson asked, pulling out a small trophy. That's my individual speaker award from last weekend's debate tournament, sir, James explained, fighting to keep frustration from his voice. A woman in her 20s had stopped and was now openly recording the interaction on her phone. 2 more people joined her, phones raised. Officer, is there a problem here? Called one man, his voice carrying across the now quiet street. Police business. Please step back, Dawson replied without looking up from James's belongings. James took a deep breath. Officer Dawson, he said, reading the name badge. I understand you're doing your job, but I respectfully ask again, what specific crime am I suspected of committing? Instead of answering, Dawson pulled out handcuffs. Turn around slowly. Handcuffs. James couldn't mask his shock. Sir, I haven't done anything wrong. This is completely unnecessary. Resisting will only make things worse, Dawson warned, advancing with the handcuffs. I'm not resisting, but I'm asking for clarification, James insisted, his voice rising slightly. I know my rights, sir. The crowd had grown to about a dozen people now, several recording the interaction. A passing city bus even slowed, passengers pressing their faces against the windows. Last warning. Turn around, Dawson ordered, his patience visibly wearing thin. James slowly turned, keeping his movements deliberate. I'm complying, officer, but I want it noted that I'm doing so under protest, and I don't consent to any searches. Noted, Dawson replied dryly, securing the handcuffs around James's wrists. They clicked closed with a finality that sent a chill through James's body. This is ridiculous, someone from the crowd called out. That kid hasn't done anything. Mind your business, Dawson shot back, guiding James toward the patrol car. James's mind raced through options. He knew making a scene would only escalate the situation, but standing silent felt like accepting guilt for something he hadn't done. Officer, my mother is expecting me home. She's a nurse at Westfield General and leaves for the night shift at 6:30. Can I at least call her? Dawson paused, considering. You can call from the station after processing. Processing? James repeated incredulously. For what charge? Another patrol car rounded the corner, lights flashing but sirens silent. A female officer emerged, Officer Ramirez according to her nameplate. Everything okay here, Dawson? She asked, eyeing the growing crowd with concern. Got a potential suspect in the quick-stop robbery. Taking him in for questioning, Dawson replied. Officer Ramirez frowned slightly, looking at James more carefully. This is the suspect? He looks like a kid. Matches the description. Tall, young black male, backpack, Dawson stated firmly. That description matches half the teenagers in Westfield, James pointed out, immediately regretting his tone as Dawson's grip tightened on his arm. Watch it, Dawson warned. Officer Ramirez stepped closer, lowering her voice. Richard, you sure about this? The chief's been clear about community relations after last month's incident. Dawson bristled visibly. I'm doing my job, Ramirez. You might want to try it sometime instead of playing politics. James caught the exchange, his eyes darting between the 2 officers. The tension between them was palpable, revealing department divisions he hadn't considered before. The crowd had now swelled to nearly 20 people, many openly hostile to Dawson's actions. Someone had started a live stream, narrating the events with outrage. My uncle works at the Pentagon, James said quietly, not as a threat but as a simple statement of fact. He always told me to stay calm in situations like this, but also to stand up for my rights. Dawson scoffed. Yeah, kid. My uncle works at NASA, and my cousin's the Queen of England. Save it for someone who cares. Officer Ramirez shot Dawson a disapproving look before turning to James. What's your name, son? James Wilson, ma'am. Westfield High School senior class. Recognition flickered across Ramirez's face. Wilson? Any relation to Dr. Wilson at Westfield General? She's my mother, James confirmed, relief washing over him at finding some connection. Ramirez nodded thoughtfully. I know your mother. She treated my father last year after his stroke. She's an excellent nurse. Dawson interrupted. This isn't a social call, Ramirez. I'm taking him in. On what charge specifically? Ramirez pressed, her posture shifting subtly to place herself between James and Dawson. Suspicion of involvement in the quick-stop robbery, possible possession of stolen goods, Dawson replied, gesturing to the backpack. My debate notes and textbooks are stolen goods? James asked, unable to hide his disbelief. A man in a business suit stepped forward from the crowd. I'm an attorney. I'd advise you to release this young man immediately, officer. You've established no probable cause, and this detention appears discriminatory. Dawson glared at the man. Stay out of police business unless you want obstruction charges. I'm happy to take those charges to court, the attorney replied calmly, pulling out a business card. Calvin Walsh, ACLU Volunteer Council. And everything happening here is being recorded by at least 15 citizens. The situation had reached a critical point. James stood in handcuffs between two officers with opposing views on how to proceed, surrounded by an increasingly agitated crowd, all while the minutes ticked by before his mother would leave for work, unaware her son was being detained just blocks from home. Officer Dawson, James began, choosing his words carefully. I understand you have a job to do. All I'm asking is for the specific reason I'm being detained, and to make one phone call. That's within my rights. Dawson's radio suddenly crackled to life. All units in the vicinity of downtown, be advised we have a 10 to 50 at the intersection of Oak and 9th Street. Multiple vehicles involved. Officer Ramirez immediately responded to her radio, Unit 227 responding. Before leaving, she turned to Dawson. Think carefully about your next move here, Richard. This doesn't feel right. With that warning, she hurried back to her patrol car. Left alone with James again, Dawson seemed to waver momentarily. The crowd remained, phones recording, as the afternoon shadows grew longer across the sidewalk. The confrontation had reached an impasse, with neither side willing to back down. And then, cutting through the tension like a knife, came a sound of tires on pavement as a sleek black government-issued SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. The black SUV's engine purred to a stop as Officer Dawson's attention shifted from James to the new arrival. For a moment, the entire scene seemed frozen in anticipation. The crowd of onlookers, now nearly 30 strong, parted instinctively as if sensing the vehicle's importance. Probably just another tourist lost downtown, Dawson muttered, tightening his grip on James's arm. Let's go, kid. You can sort this out at the station. James winced at the pressure, but remained composed. Officer, I've cooperated fully. There's still no reason for this detention. Save it, Dawson snapped, his patience clearly exhausted. His earlier hesitation had evaporated, replaced by a stubborn determination to see this through. I don't need some high school smartmouth telling me how to do my job. The attorney who had intervened earlier stepped closer. Officer, I'm Jonathan Reynolds with the Civil Liberties Alliance. This detention is becoming less defensible by the minute. Dawson's face flushed with anger. Back off, Reynolds. One more word and you're interfering with police business. It's not interference to witness and document a civil rights violation, Reynolds countered calmly, his phone still recording. The young man has asked repeatedly why he's being detained, and you've provided no specific reason. James noticed the SUV's door opening, but couldn't see who was emerging. The handcuffs bit into his wrists as he shifted position. Officer, James tried again, his voice leveled despite the situation. My uncle told me that communication prevents escalation. Can we please talk about what's happening here? Your imaginary Pentagon uncle again. Dawson laughed derisively. Kid, save the stories. I've heard every excuse in the book. He began maneuvering James toward the patrol car with increasing force. James stumbled slightly, causing gasps from a crowd. He's not resisting, shouted a woman with groceries. Leave him alone. Everybody stay back. Dawson ordered, his free hand moving toward his holster in a gesture that instantly heightened the tension. James froze, understanding the volatile nature of the moment. I'm complying, sir. No need for escalation. Dawson reached the patrol car and roughly turned James to face it. "I want to search you more thoroughly before transport." "Standard procedure. I've already been searched," James pointed out. "And you've been through my backpack." "Don't tell me how to do my job," Dawson growled, beginning to pat down James's legs with unnecessary force. James bit his lip as Dawson's hands moved roughly up his legs and torso. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, more hostile. "You're hurting him," called an elderly man with a walking cane. Dawson ignored the comment, reaching for James's backpack again. "Going to take another look at what you're carrying." This time, his search was aggressive and careless. He dumped the contents onto the hood of the patrol car, sending papers flying in a light breeze. James's laptop clattered against the metal surface. "Be careful with that," James exclaimed, watching in dismay as his debate notes scattered. "Those are important documents. Should have thought about that before you decided to match a suspect description," Dawson retorted, rifling through the pile without concern. James watched helplessly as his carefully organized research notes for nationals fluttered in the wind. Some pages skittered across the pavement, where a few sympathetic onlookers scrambled to retrieve them. "That laptop contains all my college application essays," James said quietly. "Please be careful with it." Dawson picked up the laptop, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. Expensive equipment for a high school student. "Where'd you get the money for this?" "It was a scholarship award for academic excellence," James replied, frustration finally creeping into his voice. "From the Young Leaders Foundation." "The certificate is in the front pocket of my backpack." "Convenient," Dawson said dismissively, dropping the laptop back onto the pile with a concerning thud. The distinctive sound of cracking plastic made James wince. "That's destruction of property," Reynolds called out, recording the incident. Dawson turned toward the attorney, pointing an accusatory finger. "One more word and you're in cuffs too." "On what charge?" Reynolds challenged. "Obstruction," Dawson fired back. James caught movement in his peripheral vision, someone approaching from the direction of the black SUV. He turned his head slightly, trying to see who it was. Dawson grabbed his radio, pressing the call button. "Dispatch, this is Officer Dawson. I need a transport vehicle at the corner of Maple and 5th. Have one suspect in custody, possible accomplice in the quick-stop robbery." The radio crackled with the dispatcher's response. "Copy that, Officer Dawson. Can you provide a description of the suspect?" "African-American male, approximately 6 feet tall, 17 to 20 years old, wearing Westfield High School uniform," Dawson reported, looking directly at James. "Officer," the dispatcher's voice returned, sounding confused. "The suspects in the quick-stop robbery were identified yesterday as 2 Caucasian males in their 30s. Officers Brooks and Martinez made arrests this morning." "Didn't you read the morning brief?" A hush fell over the crowd as the dispatcher's words echoed clearly from Dawson's radio. James felt a mixture of vindication and renewed outrage. The robbery suspects had already been arrested? Dawson's face reddened visibly. He turned away from the crowd, lowering his voice. "Dispatch, I have reason to believe this individual may be connected to other unreported incidents in the area." "What other incidents?" James asked, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Officer, if the quick-stop suspects are already in custody, why am I being detained?" Dawson turned back, anger flashing in his eyes. "Because I said so." "That's reason enough." "Actually, it's not," came a new voice, deep and authoritative. James turned to see a tall, distinguished black man in his late 40s approaching from the direction of the SUV. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit with a subtle American flag pin on the lapel. His bearing was unmistakably military, despite the civilian attire. "Who the hell are you?" Dawson demanded, instinctively placing himself between James and the newcomer. "Thomas Wilson, Deputy Director of Special Operations at the Pentagon," the man replied calmly, producing an ID wallet that he flipped open with practiced ease. "And you appear to be detaining my nephew without cause, officer." Dawson, the officer supplied automatically, his eyes widening slightly at the ID credentials. "Richard Dawson." "Well, Officer Dawson," Tom continued, his voice carrying an undercurrent of steel beneath its professional calm, "perhaps you could explain why James is in handcuffs when the suspects in the crime you've referenced are already in custody?" Dawson's demeanor shifted subtly, an almost imperceptible straightening of his posture. "Sir, this is a local police matter." "With all due respect, I understand jurisdictional boundaries quite well, Officer Dawson," Tom interrupted smoothly. But civil rights violations fall under federal purview, especially when they occur in view of, he gestured to the crowd of recording bystanders, what appears to be several dozen witnesses. James had never been so relieved to see his uncle. Tom Wilson wasn't just any Pentagon official. He specialized in intelligence oversight and accountability. James had grown up hearing his uncle's stories about the importance of constitutional protections and ethical conduct in law enforcement. Uncle Tom, James acknowledged with a nod, keeping his voice steady despite his relief. Tom approached, eyes scanning James for any signs of injury. "Are you all right, James?" "Yes, sir." A bit confused about why I'm being detained, but physically fine. Tom nodded once, then turned his full attention back to Dawson. "Officer, I'd like to see the probable cause documentation for this detention." "I don't need to provide that to you," Dawson replied, though his earlier confidence had clearly diminished. "No, you don't," Tom agreed reasonably. "You'll be providing it to the Federal Review Board I intend to convene tomorrow morning. But I thought I'd give you the courtesy of explaining your actions now, officer to officer." "You're not an officer," Dawson challenged. Tom smiled thinly. 22 years, Marine Corps, retired as colonel before accepting my current position. "But you're right, I'm not currently a police officer. I am, however, intimately familiar with proper detention protocols and Fourth Amendment requirements." The crowd had grown silent, watching the exchange with rapt attention. Reynolds, the attorney, had moved closer, still recording. "Tell me, Officer Dawson," Tom continued conversationally, "are you familiar with the consent decree your department signed with the Justice Department last year? The one specifically addressing discriminatory stop-and-frisk practices." Dawson's jaw tightened. "That has nothing to do with this situation." "I think it might," Tom replied, glancing pointedly around. "Especially considering the high-definition government surveillance camera on that light pole that's been recording this entire interaction. Part of the urban security grid upgrade my department helped implement last year." Dawson's eyes darted to the light pole Tom had indicated, where indeed a small camera was mounted, its lens aimed directly at their location. "That footage is automatically archived and time-stamped," Tom continued. "It would show James walking from his school, your initial stop, and everything that's happened since." James noticed beads of sweat forming on Dawson's forehead despite the cool evening air. "Uncle Tom," James spoke up, "Officer Dawson was about to take me to the station. He searched my backpack and may have damaged my laptop." Tom's gaze hardened as he looked at the scattered contents on the patrol car's hood. He reached for James's laptop, examining the cracked corner. "This appears to be property damage, Officer Dawson. This laptop contains James's college application materials. It was a merit award. It was necessary to inspect all items," Dawson insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "By throwing them on your vehicle?" Tom questioned, one eyebrow raised. "Is that department protocol for handling potential evidence?" Dawson didn't answer. Tom reached into his suit jacket and produced a small leather notepad. "Officer Richard Dawson, badge number 4872, Westfield Police Department. Is that correct?" "Yes," Dawson replied stiffly. "And your supervising officer would be?" "Lieutenant Crawford." Tom jotted down the information. "Thank you. Now, I'd appreciate it if you'd remove those handcuffs from my nephew. Unless, of course, you can articulate a specific, legally defensible reason for his continued detention." Dawson hesitated, clearly weighing his options. The crowd watched silently, phone still recording. The police radio remained quiet, the dispatcher perhaps listening to the unfolding situation. "The handcuffs, Officer Dawson," Tom repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. Finally, Dawson moved behind James and unlocked the handcuffs. The metal bracelets fell away, leaving red marks on James's wrists. "Thank you," James said quietly, rubbing his wrists. Tom placed a supportive hand on James's shoulder before addressing Dawson again. "I'll be speaking with your chief tomorrow. I suggest you prepare a comprehensive incident report explaining your actions here today. Be particularly thorough about your probable cause determination." Dawson's face had taken on a sickly pallor. "Sir, perhaps we could discuss this privately." "I think we've had enough privacy in law enforcement," Tom replied evenly. "Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Wouldn't you agree?" The attorney Reynolds stepped forward. "Mr. Wilson, Jonathan Reynolds, Civil Liberties Alliance. I've documented this entire interaction and will be happy to provide you with the footage." "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," Tom replied with a nod. "I may be in touch." My office will be conducting a thorough review. James began gathering his scattered papers and books, assisted by several bystanders who had collected pages from the sidewalk. His laptop, when he tried to open it, wouldn't power on. Officer Dawson, Tom said, noticing the laptop's condition, it appears you've rendered my nephew's computer inoperable. Please note that in your incident report as well. Dawson stood awkwardly by his patrol car, authority rapidly diminishing as the situation slipped completely from his control. I was just doing my job. Were you? Tom asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. Because from where I stand, it looks like you were doing something else entirely. He turned to address the crowd. Thank you all for your concern and vigilance. Citizen oversight is essential to democratic policing. Several onlookers applauded. Others nodded in agreement. Tom helped James finish packing his belongings. Let's get you home, James. Your mother will be wondering where you are. As they turned to leave, Dawson called out, You can't just walk away. There are procedures. Indeed there are, Tom interrupted, turning back. Legal procedures that require probable cause for detention. Constitutional procedures that protect against unreasonable search and seizure. Departmental procedures regarding professional conduct and use of force. He took a step closer to Dawson, lowering his voice. I've spent my career protecting this country's ideals, Officer Dawson. That includes protecting citizens from those who might abuse their authority. Tom reached into his pocket and handed Dawson a business card. My direct line. You'll be hearing from me again very soon. With that, Tom guided James toward the waiting SUV, leaving Officer Dawson standing alone beside his patrol car, surrounded by the dispersing crowd, many of whom cast disapproving glances his way. As they reached the vehicle, James looked back once at Dawson, who was now speaking frantically into his radio, likely reporting to his supervisor. In that moment, James felt not triumph but profound sadness for a system that could allow such abuses of power. You okay? Tom asked, noticing James's expression. Yes, James replied, climbing into the SUV. Just thinking about how differently this might have gone if you hadn't shown up. Tom's face grew somber as he closed the door and walked around to the driver's side. Through the windshield, James could see his uncle pause, looking back at Officer Dawson with an expression that promised this matter was far from over. 6 months had passed since the incident at the corner of Maple and Fifth. Summer had given way to fall, and fall to the first whispers of winter in Westfield. The town had changed subtly in those months, as had many of its residents. James Wilson sat in a university admissions office, his acceptance letter to Georgetown University clutched in his hand. The prestigious presidential scholarship covered full tuition, room, and board. His application essay about justice, accountability, and the power of citizen oversight had apparently resonated deeply with the admissions committee. Mr. Wilson, the admissions director, Dr. Harper, called from her doorway. Please come in. James entered the tastefully decorated office, still amazed that his journey had brought him here. After the incident, he had channeled his experience into his studies in community activism, starting a youth program focused on constitutional rights education. Congratulations again, Dr. Harper said, gesturing to a chair. Your application was truly exceptional. The committee was particularly impressed with your community initiative. Thank you, James replied, settling into the chair. It's been a transformative year. I understand you've been offered the Justice Department internship as well, Dr. Harper noted, reviewing his file. That's quite an achievement for an incoming freshman. James nodded. Yes, in the Civil Rights Division. I start next summer. What Dr. Harper didn't know was the series of events that had unfolded after his encounter with Officer Dawson. His Uncle Tom had been true to his word about investigating the incident thoroughly. The scene shifted to the Westfield Mall, where Richard Dawson adjusted his ill-fitting security guard uniform. The polyester blend scratched against his neck, a constant reminder of how far he had fallen. The security company name badge felt like a mockery compared to the polished shield he once wore with pride. Dawson, we've got teenagers loitering near the food court again, crackled his supervisor's voice through the walkie-talkie. On my way, Dawson replied, suppressing a sigh. He passed the electronics store, where a news segment played on the display televisions. The headline scrolled across the bottom. Westfield Police Department completes federal oversight training after civil rights investigation. Dawson averted his eyes. He didn't need the reminder of how his career had imploded. The department investigation that followed the Wilson incident had uncovered a pattern of similar stops with no probable cause, all documented in Dawson's own poorly written reports. Body camera footage he had forgotten to submit revealed a history of misconduct that could no longer be ignored. When the Internal Affairs investigation expanded to include his personnel file, they discovered he had falsified credentials on his initial application, claiming military service he never performed. That final revelation had been enough for termination rather than mere suspension. His police pension gone, his reputation in tatters, the mall security job was all he could find. The irony wasn't lost on him that he now worked for a company owned by a former officer who had been fired years earlier for similar misconduct. Across town at the Westfield Police Department, Chief Martinez unveiled the new Community Oversight Board during a press conference. The 10-member civilian panel would review all use-of-force incidents and questionable stops. "This represents a new chapter for our department," Chief Martinez announced to the assembled reporters. "True public safety requires community trust and accountability." The reforms had come after the Wilson incident video went viral, garnering millions of views and national media attention. What had begun as one officer's misconduct had exposed systemic issues within the department. Among the reporters covering the event was Lena Jackson, whose live stream of James's detention had launched her career as a civil rights journalist. Her subsequent investigation into Westfield's policing practices had earned her a regional Emmy nomination. "Chief Martinez," she called out during the Q&A, "how will the department ensure these changes are meaningful rather than cosmetic?" "Transparency, Ms. Jackson," the chief replied. "Every complaint, every stop, every use of force incident will be documented and publicly accessible through our new online dashboard." Back at the mall, Dawson approached the group of teenagers near the food court. For a moment, his hand moved instinctively toward a holster that was no longer there. "Mall policy prohibits loitering," he stated flatly. "You need to make a purchase or move along." The teenagers looked up, unimpressed by the authority of a mall security guard. One of them, a young man with a familiar face, caught Dawson's attention. "Brian," Dawson said, recognizing his own son. "What are you doing here?" Brian Dawson, now 18, barely acknowledged his father. "Just hanging with friends, Dad." The tension between them was palpable. Their relationship had deteriorated after Richard lost his job, along with the family's financial stability. Brian's college plans had collapsed when his father's disgrace cost him the legacy admission to the police academy he had been counting on. "You should be studying," Richard said awkwardly. "College applications. Already taken care of," Brian interrupted. "Got rejected from Georgetown last week." The position went to some kid from Westfield High with a perfect academic record and an impressive commitment to justice. Richard flinched, immediately understanding the reference. "Brian, we've talked about this. What happened wasn't." "Save it." Brian cut him off, standing to leave. "My friends and I were just going anyway." As Brian and his friends walked away, Richard Dawson stood alone in the busy mall, invisible to the shoppers passing by. The security uniform that had once seemed like a temporary setback now felt like a permanent reminder of consequences. At the Pentagon, Tom Wilson reviewed the final report on the Westfield Police Department reforms. As promised, he had pursued the matter diligently, leveraging his position to ensure a thorough federal investigation. The findings had led to department-wide changes, including new training protocols and accountability measures. His secretary interrupted with a message. "Sir, James Wilson is on line 1. Tom picked up the phone. "James, good to hear from you. How was the Georgetown visit?" "Amazing," James replied, enthusiasm evident in his voice. "I've officially accepted their offer." "Congratulations," Tom said warmly. "Your parents must be proud." "They are. Mom's already planning what to send for my dorm room." James paused before continuing. "I saw on the news that the Oversight Board is officially active in Westfield now." "Yes," Tom confirmed. "Sometimes one incident can create meaningful change when the right pressure is applied." "And Officer Dawson?" James asked, his tone more curious than vindictive. Tom hesitated. "Last I heard, he's working security at the mall. His son lost that internship opportunity he was counting on." A moment of silence passed between them. James had never wished for Dawson's personal destruction, only accountability. "Actions have consequences," Tom said finally. "For better or worse." "I understand that now more than ever," James replied thoughtfully. "My constitutional law professor says justice isn't about revenge, but restoration." "Wise professor," Tom noted. "That's partly why I called," James continued. I'm starting a mentorship program for high school students interested in law enforcement and civil rights, teaching them that these principles can work together, not against each other. That's excellent, James. I was thinking about inviting Brian Dawson to participate, James said. Breaking the cycle, you know? Tom smiled at his nephew's capacity for growth and compassion. That's what real justice looks like, James. Not just consequences, but transformation. As winter settled over Westfield, the changes continued to unfold. The Oversight Board reviewed its first cases. Officers adjusted to new accountability measures. Citizens learned to document interactions with police. And in a small mall security office, Richard Dawson stared at a flyer for a youth mentorship program, his son's name circled among the participants. The program's mission statement read, "Building a future where justice serves all communities equally." He folded the flyer carefully and placed it in his pocket. Some lessons came at an impossibly high cost, but perhaps they could still prove valuable. Not just for him, but for the community he had failed to properly serve.